for attending this virtual meeting of the Economy, Transport and Environment Select Committee. This meeting is being webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. I will begin by reading the names of members on the committee so they can confirm their attendance for the public record. Members, please unmute and confirm your attendance when your name is called so we can ensure you can be heard. So I'll start with Councillor Burgess, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Benison.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Dibbs. No. Councillor Dibbs? No, I don't think we've got Councillor Dibbs. Councillor Forster.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes has given his apologies, and so we have Councillor Vaughan deputising. Councillor Vaughan.
Yeah, present.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Curl has given his apologies. I'm not sure whether we have a deputy for Councillor Curl.
No, I don't believe we have, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Councillor Mellor.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor Philpott.
Yes, I'm present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, I finally managed to get in. I had lots of technical problems trying to join.
Oh dear.
Can I ask a quick question? The lady said earlier, I forget her name, I apologise, that if we do get technical problems, we can't vote. This is not a semi-judicial or quasi-judicial committee like regulatory, so why can't we vote as long as we know what the gist of everything is? Because it seemed a little bit over the top to me.
But we are gonna have various ways of voting. The main way is going to be in the chat. Can you mute, please, whoever's unmuted? You can also record your vote by typing into the chat, Councillor Simpson, and the team will notice that and log your vote accordingly. So I think it should work. Let's press on, and if we do encounter any problems, please put your hand up later on. Councillor Thierry, can you confirm you can hear okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Todd.
Yeah, present.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Present.
And Councillor Withers. Okay. Well, I don't think we've got any other deputies that haven't been called, but I'm sure someone will tell me if we have. I'll also ask whether Councillor Glenn has joined as chairman of the Policy and Resources Select Committee. Councillor Glenn, are you present?
I don't believe he's here yet, Chairman, no.
Okay, fine. Good. Well, we'll move on to item 1, which was apologies for absence. We have had apologies from Councillor Hughes and Councillor Curl, as I said. Is anyone aware of any other apologies? I don't think we've heard from Councillor Dibbs, so we'll have to get in touch with him. No, okay, well, we'll move on then to item 2, declarations of interest. I'd like to remind members that if they have a disclosable pecuniary interest in any item to be discussed today, they should declare it at the time that item is discussed, please. Moving on, item 3, the minutes. And we have the minutes of the meeting held on 14th of January 2020. I'm sure many of you will have noticed, like I did, that in those minutes, the apologies for absence come twice. So, Katie, I hope you can delete the second one of those, please. That was the only.
Thank you.
It's the only thing I spotted. Has anyone else got any comments on the minutes? Please raise a hand. No. Oh, in that case, can I ask if the minutes are agreed? And please just unmute briefly and say agreed if you can, please.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thanks, members. Great. Well, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to sign those minutes, seeing as we're communicating virtually, but perhaps the team could record my signature on those minutes for me. Item 5, Chairman's announcements. I'll just formally remind members we do have a new method of voting using a poll in the chat, which the Chief Executive did explain in an email to us. We'll get to that when we come to the recommendations, and I'm sure it'll work well. I'd also like to take this opportunity to put on record the thanks and appreciation of the committee for all of the staff, Stuart Jarvis and everyone who works in the ETE team for their magnificent response during the crisis, which really made us all proud. And it's thanks on behalf of us as the committee and thanks on behalf of everyone in Hampshire. And I wanted to put that on record at this formal meeting. So moving on to item 6, our first substantial item, the Transport for the South East strategy. Pre-scrutiny for a decision to be taken tomorrow. And I'd like to invite the presenting officer, Andrew Wilson, to introduce the item, please. And Stuart Jarvis, if you would like to say anything beforehand, please let me know.
No, thank you, Chairman. I think it's probably best if we go straight to Andrew's presentation, but I'll, of course, be happy to help with any questions afterwards.
Thanks. OK, Andrew, over to you.
OK, thank you very much, Chairman. Yep, just to introduce myself, my name's Andrew Wilson. I'm the Public Transport Manager at the County Council. And in addition to that, over the last 12 months, I've been involved quite deeply with the Transport for the South East work, both along with colleagues here and with colleagues at Transport for the South East. I'm going to run through the main points of this report for you this afternoon in Keith Wilcox's absence, who couldn't be with us this afternoon. So I'll start with the purpose of the report, which is to enable the Select Committee this afternoon to pre-scrutinise the recommendations that will go to Cabinet at its meeting on the 14th of July regarding Transport for the South East proposal to secure statutory status as a local transport body and for the Cabinet to approve the Transport for the South East transport strategy. First of all, some background information and context to set the scene for TFSE. The TFSE area goes all the way from Hampshire and Berkshire in the west over towards Dover and beyond in Kent. It skirts underneath the M25 and encompasses all those authorities along the south coast between Hampshire and Kent. It includes our neighbours, Portsmouth, Southampton and the Isle of Wight. The area has a population of 7.5 million people, 4 million workers and 330,000 businesses. It includes the major national economic assets such as the ports of Southampton, Portsmouth and Dover, and includes international airports and some of the busiest road and rail routes in the country. So we'll move on to our TFSE journey so far. In December 2016, our Cabinet gave its approval for Hampshire County Council to join this Strategic Transport Partnership. And since then, TFSE has been operating as a shadow local transport board, or LTB, with Councillor Humby being the County Council's representative on that board. There are other LTBs operating around the country in shadow form similar to TFSE, for example, Midlands Connect and England's Economic Heartland. The only formally adopted LTB in the country at the moment is Transport for the North. So TFSE potentially, if it moves quite quickly, has the potential to become the second formally adopted LTB. The high-level aims of TFSE are to create a joined-up transport strategy for the region and to have greater influence over government funding decisions. In effect, to make the case and lobby for funding to be directed to the South East rather than to other parts of the country. It also provides the scale to enable local authorities to work together to bring about regionally significant transport investment that individual authorities would not be able to deliver on their own. As well as the local transport authorities, TFSE also encompasses representation from the region's local enterprise partnerships, district councils and national parks, the Department for Transport, as well as other transport organisations such as Network Rail, Highways England, and bus, rail and ferry operators. Okay, so a little bit about how TFSE works and its structures. The Shadow Board has been functioning, as I said, since the end of 2016. The board is supported by a senior officer group, and usually Keith Wilcox or myself would attend that senior officer group. There's a group developing the transport strategy, which I attend, and there's also a governance subgroup that Councillor Humby attends, supported by Susie Hanlon from our legal team. And Councillor Humby is also the TFSE lead member for communications with the South East MPs. And Councillor Humby has led a number of very productive MP engagement sessions in Westminster. So far we've had very full and very positive engagement with TFSE from the start. We're one of the largest authorities and amongst the most influential. There's already a lot of focus on the Hampshire area within TFSE that's helped us influence the strategy development and the work plan so far. For example, in Hampshire, we've got, along with the two cities of Portsmouth and Southampton, we're the only area in the southeast to have Transforming Cities Fund projects ongoing. And also we have a future transport zone in the Solent area, all of which they link closely with the direction of travel of TFSE. So we have a big influence, and along with Kent County Council, we are the last two of the local transport authorities to sign up to the proposal to government and to the transport strategy. And it's probably fair to say that this is because we've been very thorough in analysing the TFSE proposals over time and raising potential issues and asking for those to be dealt with. So a little more on the detail of the transport strategy. It sets out a vision, goals and priorities. TFSE's vision, if I just read that, it's that by 2050, the Southeast will be a leading global region for net zero carbon and sustainable economic growth, where integrated transport, digital and energy networks have delivered a step change in connectivity and environmental quality. Now, this TFSE vision sits comfortably alongside both the County Council's climate emergency objectives and the recommendations of the Hampshire 2050 Commission of Inquiry. Now, what follows on from that vision is the current TFSE work plan. There's work underway on a future mobility strategy, and that's looking at how people will move around in years to come. We've started work on a freight and logistics strategy, and the first of the transport corridor studies is just starting, and that is looking at the links between Kent and Hampshire and all the way through the Sussexes along the south coast to better improve economic and transport connectivity. And that's the first of several transport corridor studies that will take place. A piece of work has also recently started to look at the medium-term impacts of COVID-19 on the transport network and how we as a region can best emerge from the situation that we're currently in. The transport strategy was subject to extensive consultation during the autumn and winter of 2019, moving into 2020, and that gained strong support generally. Now, I'll move on to the proposal to government in a little more detail. Now, in order to achieve statutory status, TFSE has to submit a proposal to government, identifying, amongst other things, the powers and responsibilities it is seeking to be passed down from government. This proposal underwent consultation during 2019, and amendments included several issues raised by Hampshire County Council, and the Shadow Board approved the proposal to government in September 2019. A few examples in the proposal include setting the overall objectives for rail franchises in our area, jointly setting the Highways England road investment strategy, and having the ability to implement public transport integrated ticketing schemes. As any schemes coming out of the strategy would only be implemented with the consent of the local transport authorities affected. Throughout the development of the proposal to government, we have always stressed the importance of the principle of subsidiarity and the drawing down of powers from central government rather than TFSE taking powers from the local transport authorities. And that's something that's come through quite strongly in the work to date and is part of the proposal to government. So to summarise, the government arrangements are necessary to enable TFSE to carry out what will become its statutory duty and deliver a transport strategy. Without Hampshire County Council's agreement, TFSE can't move forward with its proposal to government. The transport strategy aligns well with our own ambition to deliver a clean, sustainable transport system supporting sustainable economic growth. It complements our 2050 climate emergency objectives and forms a strong policy framework from which to develop our own local transport plan, as we are doing over the next weeks, months, over the next 12 months or so. One thing that's come through is that it's really important that TFSE adds value to the region. And one of the major benefits that TFSE can bring in that respect is the scale of resource and influence to address transport issues that we as local transport authorities cannot resolve in isolation. So finally, moving on to the recommendations, they are for today that the Select Committee either supports the recommendation being proposed to Cabinet set out on pages 1 and 2 of the report, or the committee agrees any alternative recommendations to Cabinet with regards to the proposal set out. Thank you, Chair. I think that's a quick run through.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very much appreciated. Members, would anyone like to kick off with a question or comment? Please just raise your hand, or you can put RTS in the chat for request to speak, which I will see. So, Councillor Philpott, I'll come to you first.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just making sure my IT works properly before I start. I noticed actually it's a very comprehensive report and an extremely comprehensive document, and I made my way through it. It's quite a lot to read. I noticed in paragraph 22 of the report, it says in response, Hampshire County Council's response to the consultation in January, and it says, it quote, highlighted the fundamental role of central government will also need to play in supporting transport for South East objectives to increase rail and bus usage. And I have to say, I mean, I was listening to the radio the other day, Chairman, and I heard Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England. He was quoting, of all people, Lenin. I don't know if I should be quoting Lenin at the Hampshire County Council, but when he said that there are decades when nothing happens and weeks when decades happen. And I think that's probably sums up the situation that we're in pretty well. And although paragraph 25 alludes to it, and Mr. Wilson in his report also said as much, that we're looking at the potential impacts of the pandemic on people's habits and travel behaviours. One finds it very difficult at this stage to visualise what a transport network in the South East is going to look like by 2050. And whether the impact is going to, how long term the impact is going to be, because one thing that happens, has happened during this pandemic, is people become extremely averse to using any form of public transport. And one would hope that, bearing in mind that our objective, as it said there, is to increase the rail and bus usage, then hopefully we'll be able to come out of this as quickly as possible, so that we can at least achieve some degree of success in terms of getting people onto public transport, because if we don't, we're in big trouble, I would suggest. The other point I wanted to make, Chairman, was regarding the report on the document itself, and that's the point that Mr. Wilson was making regarding getting investment into the South East, and I think that was the aim and ambition of this document of the TFSE. When I look at it, you know, Chairman, the nearest city to me is Portsmouth, and Portsmouth to London is 75 miles. Now, if you wanted to travel today by train from Portsmouth to London, it'll take you 1 hour and 47 minutes. That's the quickest train you can get to London today. Whereas the north of England, which is the area which is to be levelled up, say, for example, Doncaster, for instance, it's not as far north as you can go, but let's take Doncaster, for instance, is 180 miles. It's 105 miles further away from London, and the quickest train you can get there is 1 hour and 40 minutes. So it's actually quicker to get from Doncaster to London than it is to get from Portsmouth to London. So as far as investment in the southeast is concerned, and we have an enormous challenge to see how we can make our cities and in the southeast competitive when we're at such a significant disadvantage, especially considering on the page 97 of the document, it says that transport connectivity is important for minimising the likelihood of deprivation. And it also says furthermore on page 103 that 350,000 residents in the southeast commute currently into London, 83% of them by rail. So what I'm looking for really, I guess, is I hope not asking the impossible, but if we are going to level up the transport infrastructure deficit in this country, then we have to level it up from the south and not from the north. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Philpott. We are going to face a challenge arguing that, but I think it's an argument we have to make. Mr. Wilson, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to, unless you want to jump in, Stuart. I'm quite happy to take that.
I'm happy for Andrew to sort of answer this substantially. The only point I make, Councillor Philpott, is that being close to London, railway lines go in both directions, and for Hampshire's economy, it's fundamentally important that we reduce the amount of commuting from people living in Hampshire and working in London. The aim, I think, is to try to see a better balance. And therefore, I do take the point about competitiveness, but a lot of things are happening in the commercial property market as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, including a lot of companies thinking that they don't want to be in London anymore because of the problems of getting people in and out, particularly in the constrained public transport sort of world that you quite rightly identified. So I think that, you know, this may be a bit of a catalytic process of changing some of the long-term locational decisions of businesses, and it's important that the transport strategy is alive to that. And I'm sure Andrew will confirm that these things are not going to be set now in tablets of stone for a world in 2050 that might be very, very different from what we have now. But I do take the point that relative competitiveness at the moment has tended to be partially dependent on how quickly one can get to London from particular centres, and that's why the Thames Valley has arguably done better than the South Coast in recent times in terms of that sort of journey into London. That might be about to change though, and the office property market in the Thames Valley is a lot more competitive and a lot more expensive than that along the South Coast. So perhaps that's where the opportunities might open up.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that, Andrew Wilson?
Yes, I'll just come back. Thank you, Chairman. One of just kind of follows on from what Stuart said, really, and one of the points that's come out of the research that TFSE have done so far is quite interesting, is that almost 90% of all journeys that start or finish in the transport for the southeast area have no involvement of London at all. And I think a lot of people are quite surprised by that statistic, given the perceived number of people who commute in and out of London from the southeast every day. And I think one of the driving forces behind the TFSE strategy will be to increase the connectivity between the towns and cities within the southeast, rather than always thinking about it's got to be going into London that's the priority. And I think that statistic of 90% of journeys having no involvement with London kind of backs that up. Just on the rail side, I think rail investment is very expensive, and there are certain people within the TFSE sphere who may well argue that the southeast has been taken for granted over recent decades with its economic outputs and its input to the Treasury, and it's not seen its fair share of major investment in major transport infrastructure. And I think that the comparatively slow journey times by rail, not only on those routes from the west coast, the main line from Bournemouth up through Winchester into London, but also Portsmouth into London, but equally the routes between Portsmouth and Southampton across the south coast and even to Brighton have seen very little investment over recent decades, and that's a real goal for TFSE to improve journey times by rail and get that rail investment in for our area, not just in the north.
Thank you. That is helpful.
Chairman, may I come back very briefly on that?
I'm sorry, we don't have time, I'm afraid. We need to keep this item to half an hour, and I'm actually going to make a general plea to members. Please, can you try and keep your questions, comment as brief as possible, because we've got a lot to get through today. If I have time, I will come back to you, Councillor Philpott. I'm going to go next to Councillor Benison, please.
Can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yes.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, I was going to ask a very brief question: is if all this should go through, and we eventually get accepted by central government, and when do we first start seeing some money coming through? Have we got any idea with the northern groupings and how quickly they've got money got through to them? Or do we have to put bids into central government to get that money?
Yeah, it's a fair question, because we're obviously going to be paying in the 55,000 a year and officer time as well. It'd be nice to know when we'll get some of that back. I'll take another question before we go to officers. Councillor Mellor, can I ask you to ask your question, please? Councillor Mellor?
Hello?
Yep. Did you have a question?
Okay. I do. I'd just like to say it's about time, after 4 years, that this is being put to bed. It's a very good policy. 7.5 million speaks volumes against 1.3, 1.4 million. I'm all for alliances that produce a seamless connectivity, which are the key words that come through in the presentation. But even more delighted for Hampshire's sake, for God's sake, we have to listen to the Mayor of Manchester and the Mayor of Liverpool every day, claiming for more funds, more support for the Northern Powerhouse, HS2, TransPennine, the Red Wall, continually mentioned. Here is a golden opportunity for us to put in a collective voice. The one thing I would say, though, I call this an alliance as such, having had a lot of experience in Transport Alliance myself, you do tend to find that eventually some of the authorities will just cherry pick exactly what they want themselves to get out of the particular alliance, as opposed to what's good for the whole region. That is something which inevitably will happen. But all I can say is it's very good. I just ask, where's the influence going to be there with Highways England? Highways England get 97% of the expenditure on roads in this country, as I believe it. Where do they fall in line with this, Andrew?
Thank you, Councillor Mellor. Can I ask you, Andrew, to respond to those 2 points, please?
Yeah, okay. In terms of, have I unmuted myself? Yeah. In terms of the influence with Highways England, one of the asks that is in the proposal to government is that TFSE has a major say in the road investment strategy for Highways England into the future, as well as a bigger say over rail franchise outputs. That is a way in with Highways England. And then moving to Councillor Benison's question, when will we see more money coming in? Well, the DFT have put some money in so far to TFSE that has funded the work on the transport strategy development that has taken place so far. we haven't got a settlement yet within TFSE from DFT for this current financial year. We're expecting that any time now, but that is for scheme development and development of the strategy. It's not for big schemes. So if you're talking about schemes like, I don't know, big investment schemes, Woking flyover, for example, on the rail network that will speed up journeys into London, that is going to be a competitive process, and it will be having to make the case for the Southeast against the other subnational transport bodies. It will be a competitive process, and I just wonder whether Stuart might be able to add further to that. I don't know.
Stuart, can you add further to that?
No, it's difficult to anticipate if the cash might flow. I think the critical thing is without a subnational transport body to lobby for the Southeast, then it's less likely than, particularly if Midlands Connect and the Heart of England one do get going, the Midlands Growth Engine. The Transport for the North has been very successful at getting investment and changing the terms of the debate about investment in the north, and therefore I think the important thing is to get the body up and running, and hopefully the money will follow from that. And I think we would have more confidence that Transport for the Southeast would be better able to articulate a transport perspective than the current kind of seeming reliance on a patchwork of LEPs to put together bids for this part of the world, as transport authorities don't seem to be getting the funding directly from government at the moment.
I think you're muted still, Chairman.
Chairman, you are muted.
Councillor Oppenheimer, we can't hear you. You're still on mute, I think.
You're still muted. You're going to have to start typing, I'm afraid.
Can we send him a chat message?
You're on mute, Mr. Chairman.
I had a problem with my microphone. Just pulled it out. It was malfunctioning. I'm going to put it back in, see if it works again.
It's working now.
Right. Yes. Seems to have reset itself. It was malfunctioning for some reason. Anyway, brief technical interlude. So I think I was going to Councillor Burgess, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst I welcome this report and looking at the whole of the South East, I'm also concerned about our sort of particular areas in Hampshire, in the sense the amount of money that Hampshire has invested in the road infrastructure, for example, Fareham, Gosport, etc., a vast amount of money to improve connectivity for residents. What will be Hampshire's policy towards infill housing built on either side of these new roads that have been built to improve connectivity, and yet other authorities are trying to shove more and more houses, more and more traffic on the roads?
Thank you. And I'll take another question before we go to officers. Councillor Simpson, can we hear your question, please? Councillor Simpson?
Just making sure mute's off. Yeah, a couple of things, if I may, Mr. Chairman. As I recollect, approximately 4% of the working population of Hampshire commutes by rail. That goes up to 12% in Herts, Rushmore, which are closer to London. That, to me, shows the poor investment that has led to overcrowding in the trains, which in turn leads to more cars on the roads, which Hampshire is responsible for. I think this is a brilliant idea that we start taking some control over what's happening, because it is absolutely crazy when you look at the statistics of where things are going, that we are not getting the investment. This is the engine house of the country. No problem with us our taxes, national taxes, helping nationally. But in order to generate those taxes, surely we need a lot better investment so that we can communicate with each other a lot better. I like the idea of the zero carbon. Are we therefore going to be looking at this, for instance, we're going to be pushing with the government to start installing a lot more electric supply points so that people like Councillor Woodward can charge his car up instead of breaking down in the middle of nowhere, no matter how much some may wish he would. Sorry, Sean.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. We'll go to Andrew Wilson now to answer those questions from Councillor Burgess and Councillor Simpson, please.
Stuart, are you going to take the question about the infill development around Fareham and Gosport after the new roads?
I'm happy to do that, Chairman. I've been involved in that. I'm very familiar with the issues that Councillor Burgess raised.
Okay.
But I can very briefly then. Yes, the County Council got funding for things like the new Newgate Lane South scheme on the basis that they were actually helping to relieve existing congestion and improve connectivity, and therefore one might suggest that it's counterintuitive to then allow more side road junctions onto such roads, which put more traffic on and kind of restore the congestion that the money came to remove in the first place. The County Council has let its views be clear, I think, as the Highway Authority on individual consultations around either planning applications or potential emerging local plan sites. And I know that we work quite closely with both Gosport and Fareham, particularly on some of these issues in the kind of run up to the emerging Fareham review of its local plan. It is my intention that we will ask the County Council to also consider adopting a policy position about allowing side road junctions and connections onto roads which have been ostensibly built to relieve existing congestion hotspots. That will either come forward as part of the Local Transport Plan 4 or potentially as an interim highways development control policy in advance of that, Chairman.
Thank you, Stuart. And Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In terms of Councillor Simpson's question about investment in rail, and you mentioned 4% generally commute by rail in Hampshire, with that figure increasing in the kind of northeast part of the county. I think it's true that we've seen poor investment levels in the rail network in Hampshire generally. I think this is an opportunity. Indeed, there's no way that without additional investment in the southeast rail network that the modal share targets for rail in the transport strategy for TFSE will ever be met, and it is predicting that many more people will travel by train in the future, certainly looking towards 2050, and that isn't going to happen without significant investment in whether it's additional rail capacity, whether it's new stations or additional lines and major infrastructure. So it's really one of the things that TFSE is talking about that has to come to this area is that additional rail investment.
Thank you. We've got two more questions and then we're going to go to the recommendation. So if your members keep it brief, it's Councillor Todd first and then Councillor Forster. So I'll go to Councillor Todd, please.
Thank you very much indeed. I had a question about zero carbon, and the word carbon appears once in the specification for the whole thing, and the target set is for 2050. Now, given that we have to get lots of other things down to zero carbon by 2050, and the housing, for example, is going to be much, much, much harder, and air flight is going to be much, much, much harder, was there much debate about whether 2050 was the right target for the entire region for rail and road and public transport? And does it have any wider role? For example, it talks about capital investment in public transport, but there's no reference to, for example, helping that move to electric or hydrogen-based fuels. So I just wondered, does it have a role, firstly, in modal shift, in driving traffic and freight onto the railway and onto public transport? And does it have a role in technology shift in terms of encouraging the hydrogen economy and also moving people towards electric?
Thank you, Councillor Todd. And straight to Councillor Forster, please, for your question.
Thank you, Chairman. The first thing I need to do is to declare an interest, because I am involved with a company and I provide advisory services around electric vehicle charging to government, central government and local government. So if I can please register that.
Yeah.
I would say in terms of this report, I wholeheartedly support it. And I do think that the point that was just raised around whether 2050 is soon enough, I do think we need to do much more to potentially bring that forward. But I think in terms of the report itself, it is a reasonable timeline. But I wanted to understand, should we put the report in as is and then decide to bring the timelines forward, i.e. move that date to 2035 or whatever we choose? Can that be readily done?
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, can we ask you to respond to those 2 points?
Yes, certainly, Chair. In terms of Councillor Todd's question about the target for 2050 initially, I think that TFSE went for a target that it thought was deliverable, that was achievable. During the consultation process for the transport strategy, there were many responses, particularly from the Friends of the Earth, who thought that 2050 wasn't anywhere near soon enough, and they were pushing for an earlier date. But I think that Transport for the South East took the decision that by being pragmatic and realising that not everything is within TFSE's own gift, that sticking to 2050 was the most pragmatic target date to go for. It will inevitably be reliant on government policy, on government funding, to bring in more things like challenge funds for buses, for electric buses. We need to see a shift towards zero emissions for road freight in particular, and we're in the early stages of talking about hydrogen fueled HGVs and larger vehicles. I think that was why 2050 was used as set as the target date, because principally it's not wholly within TFSE's gift to deliver that.
Thank you. Stuart, do you have anything to add to sum up?
If I may, Chairman, yes, very briefly. I think the final point that Councillor Forster made was, could this be brought forward? You know, can the plan be changed? And I think the answer to that is yes, it definitely could be. An awful lot does depend on national government action. You know, whether it's scrappage schemes for existing vehicles, the promotion of hydrogen technology, as well as the provision of more electric charging points, and a whole raft of measures that can be made. And I'm quite sure that TFSE will regularly review the strategy, and there's certainly the opportunity to bring forward the target date for that ambition, as indeed I think the County Council intends to do with our own climate change response and targets.
Thank you. Well, for my part, I'm a big supporter of this TFSE proposal. I think it's obviously the way government wants things to work. It will help us to punch above our weight, and it will help us to coordinate and get investment in our transport infrastructure. So I will be voting for. That takes us to the recommendation. So we are going to have a vote in the chat there, and the recommendation is to either support the proposal to Cabinet or agree alternative recommendations. So, oh, hang on a minute. Councillor Todd is now proposing a 5th recommendation. Well, okay, Councillor Todd, what would you like to propose?
I was going to suggest something along the lines of that the executive member should seek to accelerate the timing for achieving net zero carbon, should this be necessary to achieve the County Council's overall net zero carbon target?
Councillor Humby, I mean, do you feel that actually that's taken as a given, and that, you know, if we do need to bring forward the target in order to meet our statutory obligations, we'll do that? Or is there any other comment you'd like to make in response to that suggestion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I listened to the questions and debate all the way through, and thank the members for all their input on that. I don't think that is a requirement. It absolutely was discussed. Andrew and Stuart have explained that very well. It had to be a target, if you like, that was achievable. One of the reasons, and Andrew explained that early on, why ourselves and Kent were one of the last to sign, because we asked for a lot of additional work to be done. A lot of that on this very point, acknowledging the change of circumstances that we're now in, and to make sure it was flexible enough before we submitted it to the Secretary of State. So I don't believe it requires an additional recommendation. I'm certainly satisfied, and my other 16 colleagues that were sat around the table of Transport for South East, that we would achieve as early as possible. That had to be a target we had to start with that we all agreed in the first instance. So this is all about partnership working and working together. And just to add one more bit, Mr. Chairman, I sit on Transport for South East. To join everything up, as you know, I sit on Solent Transport, Transforming Cities Fund, and the LETs are all engaged with this. And we've all got the same aim. So just to assure everybody, we are doing it in a joined up way. And Andrew made the comment earlier about how the North were progressing. We need to do this one voice, but the paper gives us flexibility, and my job is to look after Hampshire as well, and that's what I would do, Mr. Chairman. So I do not believe it needs an additional recommendation, but I fully take on board Councillor Todd's point.
Thank you, Councillor Humby. Councillor Todd, I think your point's been well noted, and Councillor Humby's given a good answer there. Are you satisfied that we now proceed to the vote?
I do think it would be useful to have it on record that we are going to try and accelerate it, particularly in the context of our own overall carbon strategy. Because I'm not convinced that. My fear is that if we aim for every single bit of our carbon strategy to finish on the 31st of December 2050, that we won't hit 2050, basically. And this, to me, seems like an area that needs to move faster.
I think we all share your sentiment, and you know, certainly Katie will craft something in the minutes to reflect the fact that the committee welcomed the commitment to zero carbon. So I think what we do need to do is proceed to the vote and just gauge the mood of the committee. Obviously, scrutiny is important, and I'm not wishing to deny you your right to put alternative recommendations to a vote if that's what you want to do.
Well, it's a fifth recommendation. I'm sure there's consensus for the first four, and that's not a problem at all. And this is just essentially adding a bit of steel to the point about timing.
Right, Councillor Burgess, Deputy Chairman, please give us your thoughts.
Chairman, I anticipated this from Councillor Todd. We have the recommendations there. I think they are suffice. We are aiming for the 31st of December 2050. Some may come in before. I hope they all do. I don't believe there is a need for an extra recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, can I just suggest then, I think the Chairman suggested that if it's clearly minuted that the intent is that the county, that obviously we will follow through and achieve our overall objective by 2050 and do what it takes to achieve that. But I wasn't quite sure that that's what I heard.
I think we are agreed that it will be minuted. That the the Transport for the South East body will need to make sure that it puts in place proposals that allow the 2050 target to be met. And I'll just say that's a statutory target.
Sorry, the point I'm making is a different one. Okay, so the point I'm making is that what we need is to ensure that it's in time for Hampshire's target to be met.
Yes. Well, that's a given. That's also for the county council to ensure. So I don't think you've got anything to worry about on that front. And Katie Sherwood, I can see you've got your hand up. So would you like to comment, please, Katie?
Thank you. It's just to say regarding your comment with the minutes, Councillor Todd, that obviously the minutes will be draft up until the next meeting where they are formally agreed by all members of the committee. So if you felt there was anything that was missed or not captured fully, then that would obviously be accounted for at the next meeting and we can discuss that.
Thank you, Katie. I think we'll proceed to the vote. And I think it's been a useful discussion. What I would say, though, to all members, I think if you do want to put alternative recommendations to the committee, it's really helpful if you could give me a heads up at the beginning of the meeting and then be ready to put it into the chat so that everyone can see it. I think that would be a good way of it working. But let's go ahead with the vote. I think we will see whether the committee supports. We've got a for or against vote now coming up.
Thank you,
on the recommendations, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's Jackie Taylor in Democratic Services. I'm just populating the vote now, which will be available shortly in the chat.
Right, thank you, Jackie.
Chairman, can I just ask members, sorry to interrupt, to once they've chosen their option, to then press submit vote as well. It's a bit of a two-stage process.
Yes. Members, please vote.
Chairman, I have voted on chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm, has everyone voted now?
May I just ask, it's Councillor Mellor here. I'm pressing agree and submit vote, and it just flashes off. I don't know whether it's recorded the vote.
I think it did because we got to 9.
Okay.
Just to confirm, Chairman, that we do have a majority of members in agreement with the recommendations that this is carried.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that settles the matter. And thank you. We'll move on now to item 7, recycling and single materials recovery facility. Members, we are going to have to speed up here because I'm keen to get to the presentation on the economy, which is obviously a really important issue at this time. So we're going to have to keep this snappy, and this is a really important issue, and I think we've all got quite a lot to say about it. And I want to reassure the committee we're going to come back to the issue of waste and recycling at a subsequent meeting early in the new year, probably, at which point there'll be more progress to report. So we're not going to be able to do justice to all of the issues today, but I think it's very important that we scrutinise the plans for how things are going to proceed in terms of pausing the progress on the MRF. We've got the paper, and I'd like to invite James Potter to introduce the paper, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. In the interest of time, I will try and be brief and assume that all members have read the paper. So the paper sets out sort of some of the historic context, some of the Hampshire current performance, and the latest national position as a sort of a starter. It then goes on to sort of set out the work that we've been doing on a single MRF business case, the work that Veolia have done in getting some quotes for sort of construction of a single MRF, and the modelling that we subsequently did, which looked at the cost of borrowings and depreciation, discounts for efficiencies within the contract, and then the impacts that, should we say, a new single MRF would have on material flows. Less recyclables going to the energy recovery facilities, so and then potentially more income from the sale of the spare capacity that would result, income from recyclables, etc. Having done the modelling, what actually the outcome is that over the course of the remainder of the contract, the proposal for a single MRF is likely to cost the County Council an additional 4.6 million, and this needs to be put into the context of us seeking to make savings under the Transformation to 2019 programme of 3 million per annum. And on that basis, we want to pause the work on the single MRF whilst we review the options related to the other collection options that the government are pursuing or proposing, which is one, a twin stream option, and the other, a curbside sort option. In order to give some context to those, we've also included some of the work that we've done with the Eunomia under the banner of the Hampshire West Partnership. I would then refer you to the graphs on page 190 and 197, which show the performance implications of the three collection systems that could be operated are by themselves actually negligible in the difference. The way you get the difference is when you start to apply pressure to the residual waste capacity. So if you reduce the size of the residual waste container, you get a slight increase, but you get a significantly marked increase in recycling performance if you moved or transition to a 3-weekly residual collection system. Also, you get a similar pattern with regards to the carbon implications, and that's set out in graph 3 on 197. So what we want to do now is to look at the infrastructure implications of operating those two collection systems, both in terms of the MRF or baling facility that would be required, but also in terms of their impact on the wider transfer station network that we currently operate, because you've got more sort of segregated materials being delivered into those facilities, and there are going to be costs associated to that. We also, the paper also then sets out a little bit around the context of the work we want to do on food waste. It is coming, it's in the Environment Bill whenever that finally gets through Parliament, that separate collection will be mandatory, and we will then look to work with the districts whilst they're sort of working out how they might collect it and how we can provide both the reception infrastructure and also the, shall we say, processing capacity, be that locally ourselves or be that through merchant capacity elsewhere. So we end up with a couple of recommendations. One is to pause the work on the single MRF whilst we investigate the other options. And then the second recommendation is setting out some of the, we say, key principles of the work we want to do with the districts to ensure that the County Council is not in a position to take on any additional burdens. And I will pause there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, James. Right, let's see who has got questions. Well, Councillor Todd, you jumped in there, so I'll go straight to you.
Oh, I managed to mute myself. I have a lot of questions about this, and some of them may need to be handled offline, and some of them relate to the detail of what's in the paper, and I'll try and be very brief. Certainly, what's being proposed in terms of the MRF and twin stream and curbside makes a lot of sense, and also exploring food waste as well. I had a question about food waste, which is, does it make sense? Is it best to keep garden waste and food waste separate, or is there a role for combined anaerobic digestion? There's a reference in the paper to gasification, but there's also a reference in the paper to incineration. And I suppose that's also a technology choice that I'm quite keen to understand, which is, should we be pursuing gasification, or should we be with the older incineration technology? And I suppose that the third question that relates to that is the need to be zero carbon in the long term and how that relates to our plans for energy from waste. And then I will be recommending a couple of suggestions for recommendation at the end. And actually, at this point, I have to declare that I'm a portfolio holder for waste management at Winchester City Council, which is not a pecuniary interest, but it's one you obviously will need to know about. I do think there's a discussion about just aiming to optimise Hampshire's cost. I think we should be looking at a solution that minimises total system cost to the public purse, consistent with our partnership's carbon and recycling objectives. So I suppose I have questions about our energy from waste and recycling technologies, particularly how widely we go with anaerobic or aerobic digestion and gasification versus incineration. And I have a question about the objective we set for the work in terms of saying I think we should be aiming to minimise total cost to the public purse, recognising that we also need to set objectives for the county council.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. James, can you respond to that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. With regards to anaerobic digestion of food waste and green garden waste, I am not aware that that is happening. The way of doing that is through a process called in-vessel composting, which doesn't generate any capturable gases, and therefore you're not able to generate renewable energy, etc. from it. It also only produces what's termed a compost-like digestate rather than a digestate. So actually, most people looking at food waste who are currently collecting commingled food and garden waste are looking to move away from that. With regards to sort of, should we say, gasification and energy recovery, I think the reference to gasification is in terms of the existing planning on the site in Eastleigh, Chickenhall Lane. It's not necessarily something that we are looking to develop at this point in time. We have enough, should we say, residual waste disposal with the 3 energy facilities that we currently operate. And yes, we are looking at, should we say, the carbon side of things, and also looking at, should we say, the best cost for the taxpayer. However, that is very much a two-way street. The modelling that Eunomia have done does suggest that a curbside sort system of collection leads you to the cheapest recycling option. However, that is not one that currently any of our district partners are favouring or necessarily wishing to consider. So we are having those conversations. We are trying to, shall we say, come up with the best compromise that is the most economically and environmentally sustainable option that's acceptable to all parties. Bear in mind, there are 14 of us to try and get agreement.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson?
That was faster than I expected. Thank you. Just a couple of questions, because naturally Martin has asked most things. One, on the recommendation, it says to pause work on the MRF. In paragraph 66, the conclusion is, given the recommendation not to pursue. One says pause, the other one basically says we're not going to do it. So I'd like to get some clarification on that, and also what our current capacity is, because my understanding was the new MRF was because we were running out of capacity. The next thing is, could we have statistics made available from Wales? Now, as I understand it, in Wales, food waste is collected by order of the government, who has subsidised it. What effect has that had on general waste? Because I know the food waste has actually gone down as people have stopped wasting so much food. Now, has that had a knock-on effect for packaging and all sorts of other things? So if we've got some statistics, that would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. James, can we ask you for your response to that?
Okay, Chairman. I haven't got the figures for Wales at my fingertips, so we'll have to come back to you on that and do that work. With regards to the pausing or not pursuing, it's not pursuing at this point in time. What we want to do is have the information related to all three collection options with regards to the infrastructure and the business case, recognizing that we have to probably deliver one of them. Then once we've got all that information, we can bring that back to for a decision as to which one we're prepared to invest in alongside our partners, Portsmouth and Southampton. So it's a pause, it's a not pursue at this point in time. And with regards to capacity at the moment, the two MRFs, because we're operating two MRFs, and the paper does set out some of the sort of the background to how we came to looking at a single MRF. We're currently receiving about 100,000 tonnes, just below 100,000 tonnes of dry mixed recyclables. We have a theoretical capacity of 150,000 tonnes, but we've never actually achieved it, and I think we wouldn't achieve it given the quality criteria that we're now having to operate those plants to. So what we are looking to do is, deliver facilities that will give us probably somewhere in the region of 125 to 130,000 tonnes of DMR capacity that would allow us to accommodate, pots, tubs and trays, some of which we're already receiving as contamination, but we would then be able to recycle those, probably be able to recycle cartons. And that also, from our forecasting, would give us the headroom for sort of the foreseeable future with regards to housing growth as well.
Right, thank you, James. I mean, it strikes me that this is a very logical recommendation, a set of recommendations that's being put to us. We have to wait for clarity. We don't know what might get put in the Environment Bill through amendments. We don't know when it will be enacted and when the measures within it will actually be brought forward. So I think all we can do is keep exploring different options and wait for the government to give clarity. I just want to invite Councillor Humby to comment at this point, if you have anything to say to members on this question, please.
Well, all to add, Mr. Chairman, I just think in terms of what the paper is overall, the recommendations, it's perfectly sensible to pause at this stage, see what further recommendations come out of the Environment Bill and what that says, and to then reconsider this. And as you said, it's quite understandable that you'd want to go back and revisit this. So I would encourage members to support the paper at this stage. There is an awful lot to consider, but things are changing quite rapidly. And clearly, overall, the message has got to be that we've got to reduce waste. But there's no point investing in new infrastructure until we know the details that have come out for the Environment Bill. Yeah.
And I think inevitably, the lockdown will have delayed the government's plans. We have to expect that. But hopefully we'll start to know more soon. Has anyone else got any other points to make on this? No? Well, in that case, we will proceed to the vote shortly, but I just want to clear up the issues we've been discussing in the chat, because the last vote that we had on item 6, the Transport for the South East strategy, it was carried. We had 9 votes on the button there and 3 votes in the chat, and they were all in favour. So that was carried, that recommendation. So proceeding now to the vote for item 7, I'd like to invite Dams and Jackie to put the poll to us, please.
I thought Martin had some amendments I saw on the chat.
I did type in that I had amendments, but since this is all exploratory work, and since, dare I say, I will get a second bite of the cherry as a member of the Project Integra Board, as one of the people that this work is meant to persuade, I don't think it's worth holding the discussion up, because broadly the direction, these are clearly things that we need to investigate, although there are other things that need investigation as well. Yeah. But I will ask questions to Mr. Potter separately about that.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. No, I appreciate that. Look, I've got a lot of points to make about all of this, but as I say, we will have a longer discussion about it at a subsequent meeting. So yes, let's proceed to the vote, please, on the recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just populating the vote now, which will be in the chat shortly. Can I encourage all members to vote unless they are having any issues and they do need to put their vote in the chat? That should be showing now, and just to remind members if they could choose their option and then also then press submit vote too.
Okay, we'll just give members a minute to do that.
Can I just check if all members have now voted?
Looks like we're still waiting for a couple. Members, please vote if you have not done so. Okay, so we're up to 9 agree in the button there, and we've got also
we have 3.
We have 3 in the chat. So I think it's fair to say that the members agree the recommendations, and that's carried. Thank you, members. And James, thank you for your helpful comments. We realise you've got a very difficult job to do in steering us forward, continuing to research what the implications are of the different policies that might be put on us. And it is a matter of great public interest. I saw that in your paper, and you're right. The public are keen to improve recycling in Hampshire, and I'm sure we will when we can figure out how to do it. So you have our thanks.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
So members, I'd like to move on now to item 8, COVID-19 and the Hampshire economy. And I'd like to invite David Fletcher, please, a friend of this committee, to give us this presentation, and please feel free to share your screen so that you can put your slides up. And yeah, please go ahead, David.
Thank you, Chairman. If you just give me a second, let me see if I can get these. Just waiting for this to load up. Okay, I'm hoping, can everyone see that now?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, Chair, I will go through the slides at pace because I'm conscious that the members of the committee have actually had sight of these slides previously. So I'll just give a brief narrative for this, and we can quickly move into the opportunity for questions and discussion. So I just in terms of well, trying desperately to avoid stating the obvious. Obviously, the impact on the Hampshire economy has been severe. One of the key tasks we've already undertaken during the whole time of the lockdown process is actually starting to monitor what's happening in the economy data-wise. A lot of government data has too big a time lag associated with it, so we have identified some data sets which give us more of an immediate proxy for what's happening in the local economy. One of the pieces of data that comes through relatively quickly is the GDP, the scale of the economy, and nationally, and it largely translates to the Hampshire level as well. During the lockdown period, the economy is contracted by something like 25%. Now that won't translate to a 25% reduction in the economy over the whole year, but it gives you an essence of the kind of the scale of the contraction that we've actually experienced in the last 3 months. And you can see the claimant count there. Now, this is something that we have to take with a little pinch of salt because that claimant count will also include self-employed people who are claiming universal credit before the self-employed income support scheme kicked in when government launched that in June. On the response side, everyone will be aware, I believe, that obviously there's been substantial grant monies channeled through the business rate billing authorities, and local authorities have done a fantastic job of getting that money out to businesses. And you can see the headline stats there of the scale of what was allocated, which was 410 million across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, of which to date about 344, I think it's around about 347, somewhere in the region of 84-85% of that money has been distributed, and around about 280 to 290,000 jobs currently supported across Hampshire across the job retention scheme, which is for employed people, and the self-employed income support. The self-employed element is about 70,000 of that total figure, but a substantial quantity of jobs supported through those schemes. In terms of just some headlines around some of the key sectors, tourism, visitor economy, hospitality, all those leisure and consumer-facing activities have obviously all been struggling because of the distancing, and many attractions and hotels, etc., are clearly closed for the lockdown. And you can see just an example there, Marwell Zoo, 200 staff furloughed, and they've taken on a loan of 3.4 million just to keep themselves ticking over. The cruise sector, huge impact there. Those ships you can see anchored off the Isle of Wight, and similar pictures outside in Bournemouth and other locations. And Carnival themselves, the big operator based in Southampton, have already announced significant job losses, primarily in their head office, office-based functions. The ports, both Southampton and Portsmouth, significant reductions in the volumes of freight going through those ports. And obviously for a period of time, although that has changed now, there was a stoppage of the manufacturing of the cars that are exported through the port of Southampton. And ExxonMobil refinery at Fawley experienced substantial reductions in the volumes that were being processed there. In the marine sector, this was the first bullet point is the results of a survey undertaken by the University of Kent, and showing quite a low degree of business confidence in this particular sector. And actually, if you look at an organisation like Griffin Hoverwork, they are basically processing their current order book, but I think their nervousness is about what happens longer term and whether they'll still have, an order book to work on. And a lot of you will have seen the headlines around Southampton Airport and the challenges there, not only with the lockdown, but pre-lockdown, we had the collapse of Flybe. But it's not all bad news. And just some examples of where the economy has already started to move again. You've got the mini assembly plant in Cowley starting to kick off again, and the volume of exports starting to come through the port again. At the Southampton airport, you've now got some domestic flights starting to move again. And then you're also seeing examples of investment. So it was announced that Amport House, just off the A303, is being acquired to be developed into a luxury hotel. So clearly that's an investor looking at the longer term, not the immediate. And obviously from next weekend, you've got a lot of the visitor attractions starting to kick into life again, albeit with the constraints of the distancing that needs to be implemented on those sites. And just some headline issues really around the recovery. Confidence is going to be huge, particularly amongst consumers, because even though lockdown measures might be loosened, actually that doesn't mean immediately you'll get consumer demand coming back to what it was pre-lockdown. And there's also, of course, an issue around the private sector and keeping investors confident that Hampshire is a place that it should be investing in. The people dynamic of this is going to be huge. Of those furloughed employees, something like 220,000 are the employed parts of those numbers. I mean, nationally, people are saying, up to a quarter of those furloughed jobs might be at risk once the furlough scheme comes to an end. We're going to have a huge challenge in Hampshire, as elsewhere, in actually supporting individuals affected by the fallout of the economic impact. The government will still be seeking quick wins in the south, and through the LEPs, MHCLG have been seeking projects that can spend quickly. but probably more challenging for the south and the north to secure some of that. We can't forget Brexit, and basically going back to some of the previous discussions in this committee meeting, one of the things that's really changed is the expectations around climate change and how projects need to be seen to contribute to that agenda going forward. In terms of the recovery, in terms of the short term, again, this is not covering all the points, but some of the key headlines. We need to continue to support particularly small businesses, to continue the efforts that government has made through its grant schemes and other rate relief. Town centres and high streets have been the focus of attention, get those moving again. Again, that's part of that consumer confidence element. And we need to, we've already recognised we need to do something around encouraging residents to buy local. There's a Hampshire Fair campaign that we've supported, which is advocating that. And nationally, the tourism sector is seeking support from government to drive domestic demand. And transport will be critical, particularly, and it's fairly obvious to say it, but for a place like the Isle of Wight, clearly the ferries are a crucial lifeline for them in terms of their economy. And of course, we've already mentioned Southampton Airport. In terms of the medium to long term, capital projects, the Prime Minister was talking about this yesterday, that capital projects will be one of the ways we can actually, in a sense, accelerate recovery, and that's no different in Hampshire, and there's various types of projects we could consider there. Digital connectivity, another area of investment for the future economy. I think there's an opportunity here to rethink business support. It's still a very complex landscape, both support through the growth hubs, which the LEPs run, and through government support schemes, and through more locally, organisations like the Chamber of Commerce, etc., etc. But it's a very complex landscape which could be simplified. And what I suppose I'm advocating here is we don't let go of the key conclusions from the Commission of Inquiry. In terms of the long-term prosperity for Hampshire, a lot of those are absolutely still valid, so we shouldn't let go of those. And then finally, in terms of opportunities, some of the sectors we're fortunate to have prevalent within Hampshire are identified as those likely to grow in the near future and long-term future. And obviously we need to make sure those sectors are supported. The London dynamic, again, we've touched on this earlier in the discussion. I think that there's a sort of different sides to this really. One is long-term, will London be seen as as an attractive location for businesses and for individuals for that matter in the future? But then the other side of the coin is, how will businesses deal with their own accommodation needs? Will they start to look at less big head office type functions and more a kind of dispersed, local hubs or what have you, to facilitate people to be able to access, office facilities, but without having to travel great distances? I suspect the government will still have a significant, particularly in the context of Brexit, trade-based growth strategy. That plays well for Hampshire. We're one of the key international gateways nationally, particularly with the Port of Southampton. And I guess the final point is the obvious one that we should all be reflecting on, whether you're a business, a local authority, or someone trying to support the economy. Is this is all an opportunity to really reflect on whether we can do things better in the future than we did in the past, and more effectively to support the wider economy, but more importantly, for the people that depend on that economy for their employment and well-being. So I think, Chair, it was a very whistle-stop zoom through the slides, but I'm conscious that I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to ask any questions they might have.
Thank you very much, David. Oh, I seem to have an echo. Could everyone mute? Because I'm obviously getting my own voice coming back to me. Thank you. That was very helpful, David. I think, we're very conscious that you and your team have had a real job supporting businesses. I thought it was very impressive the way the Business Hampshire website, which you only launched 4 months ago or something, became such a useful resource for businesses, and I was signposting people to it, and I still do. So I think that was a particularly impressive bit of response from us. It's a very daunting subject, this issue of recovery. Members, can I invite you to put your hands up if you'd like to come in with a comment or question? And perhaps you can take the slides down now, David, so that we can see everyone. Thanks. Right, let's see who has got their hand up. Katie, can you see any hands up there?
No, I can't see any. Oh, Councillor Simpson.
All right. Councillor Simpson and then Councillor Todd, please.
I was just going to thank David for a comprehensive report on what's been happening and what he thinks will happen in the coming weeks and months, because none of us really know. The big one, I think, was he touched on, we don't know what's happening with Brexit. Is there going to be a deal in the next 6 months or not? Almost certainly not, the way things are going. And how is that going to affect the South East economy, when it relies so much on what we're doing across the channel? Congratulations on what you have done, and best of luck with all the hard work you've got to come.
And Councillor Todd?
Yeah, I mean, this is very helpful, and thank you very much indeed. And obviously very challenging. I suppose I have two questions. One is, I suppose there's a concern that we may lose what are fundamentally good businesses, profitable businesses, because they just run out of cash and run out of road within the next couple of months, even though the fundamentals might be quite good. So I think there's going to be an element of luck in this in terms of what cash position, what debt position were people in at the start of the crisis. You know, had they just invested to redo a pub or something, in which case they're probably done for or something. But that, and then I suppose the second question is, are there any levers that we have that we need to be pulling right now? I mean, what are things that the county council can be doing in the immediate short term to get people through the next 2 or 3 months, aside from the longer term strategic things?
Thank you. David, can I invite you to respond?
You can. I'll answer the first two questions, because the last one that Councillor Todd's asked is probably the most difficult in terms of what the county council itself can do in the immediate term. I think just going back to the Councillor Simpson's question about about Brexit, I think one of the things that is true of Brexit and it's true of COVID-19 is there are some fundamentals that we need to remain true to make sure Hampshire remains a prosperous place. And one of those is around making sure we support the parts of the economy which serve national or international markets, businesses that innovate, those that effectively create wealth, if you like, within Hampshire, as opposed to businesses that are effectively serving a local market. Now, that's not to say we're not to support the businesses that serve a local market, but a lot of the, if you like, the fairly untargeted support that the government has put into the system in the short term over the last few weeks has been very much in that kind of retail, hospitality, leisure kind of sector, which is absolutely fine, because that's a sector that's been really hit hard because then demand just disappeared overnight. But I think as we look medium to long term, we need to effectively revisit the kind of the parts of the economy that I touched on before, you know, ICT, life sciences, the marine sector, aerospace, etc. They're the sectors that long term will continue to be the bedrock, if you like, of Hampshire's economy going forward. So I think we do need to make sure in terms of how we target support, and this kind of gets into Councillor Todd's first question really, is how do we better focus, I think, our efforts going forward, and that we need to make sure there are ways we can support those parts of the economy, because in many cases, apart from the furlough scheme, many of those sectors have not received any support. I think that the last point that Councillor Todd made is probably the most difficult, because I think where we are at the moment as a county council is we don't have huge financial resources to throw at this. If you look at the government, what the government put in just through those grant schemes over Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, 410 million, which was very much a short-term measure to try and take some of the immediate impact and pain out of the economy nationally. However flawed or imperfect that was, at least it was something that happened very quickly. I think going forward, what we're desperately trying to do now is look at where there are resources being made available, whether it's through the LEPs or nationally, and basically are there ways we can align some of the projects we have in Hampshire and some of the businesses with those funding streams, because that's what we need to do, is make sure Hampshire businesses are maximising all the funding opportunities that are available. But we don't, as a county council, have huge financial resources to throw at the economy like the national government did. I can see Councillor Todd's wanting to respond.
Yeah, Councillor Todd, do you want to come back?
No, I think it's helpful. I suppose there's one question which is important, is that making sure that our centres and our shopping and our recover quickly. And I wonder to what degree there's collaboration between you as a business function and the people working on the social distancing measures and other things that enable people to use our centres to feel safe and accessible, and safe and accessible and pleasant to be in, and people not worrying about being either A, run over, or B, catching something from somebody.
Yeah, no, I think Councillor Todd makes a very good point. I touched on the consumer confidence piece. I think the public confidence piece, that's a huge factor. Some parts of the demographic will very quickly revert to their previous behaviours given half the opportunity. Some parts of it will be more cautious about going back into town centres, high street shops, etc. What we have been doing at a county council in conjunction with district and borough councils is working very closely on the town centre recovery activity, which clearly brings in the highways element and making sure that the measures are safe. But it's also about how we work with the business improvement districts, etc., and the retailers to make sure. I mean, basically, what you've got to do is start reinstilling demand in the system, because at the moment the risk is that the demand isn't there and businesses just aren't going to be viable, even if they're open, because of the distancing constraints.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's clearly the case that many sectors are going to take years to recover, and if we can attract new businesses to come into Hampshire and replace some of the jobs that have lost, that will be ideal. And I'd just like to, at this point, remind everyone that we've got the Whitehall and Borden Innovation Centre, which has got plenty of space in it. If we could get some technology companies in there, and there's plenty of housing, there's the Future Skills Centre, that would be a great opportunity. So that's my little plug for Whitehall and Borden. I'm going to go next to Councillor Withers, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the heatwave recently, we saw the British population, which is always unpredictable, hit Bournemouth in a manner which was not seen probably before. And I think yesterday we had the update around London and all its suburbs of the increase of COVID-19. So we've still got this second strike fear. And I think, one of the elements that we could be better at to improve future economy and everything else is our communications, our social media. I was chatting this morning with the traffic wardens, referenced the implementation of the pedestrian and cycle measures in our main streets in Aldershot and Farnborough, how successful they've been, and the response by the public, obviously, to that measure, which has gone down really well. But again, probably something like 80% of the county population is still unaware of what we're trying to do. And to assist us in moving forward. So I think with everything we're trying to do on the economy and support our local industries and support our local shops and centres, we probably need to be a lot more proactive on local radio, on local sites to let the population know that of all ages, that we're fully supporting everything that's going forward, and actually to reassure them to actually come out and assist in supporting the economy. One of the worst things that's gone through is that there's been no public ablutions in all the shopping centres, which has not encouraged anybody to come out and shop. You know, and it's a simple thing, but when you look at the average age of a resident in Hampshire, the average age is probably over 60. When you look at the 1.9 million people we've got compared to Wales, which is 2 million. So we need to actually get those people back out supporting the economy. And I'm up here in the northeast at Aldershot, and I'm looking at the new exhibition centre at Farnborough. You know, and we need to actually encourage people to come and use that facility again, and actually get the public coming in to support it. So I know you've done a hell of a lot there working with Rushmore, and Hampshire supported that centre tremendously. But we are the eyes and ears, and I think it would be good actually if any of the councillors on this meeting have got any ideas for light bulbing to assist you in the economy, to put them forward.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Councillor Withers. We've got two more councillors wanting to come in, and then I'll go back to David to sum up. So Councillor Mellor, I think, wanted to speak. Councillor Mellor. No, well, I don't know whether Councillor Mellor can hear me, but we can't hear you. We'll go. Should we go to Councillor Forster? Had his hand up as well. Councillor Forster.
Thank you, Chairman. So following on a little bit from Councillor Withers, he made some really good points about better communication. I've had some feedback from a lot of residents, some of them who are on the borders of our areas, of my division, etc., that there's a lack of consistency in messaging, obviously between the different districts that we've got, Rushmore, Hart, and so on. Very different messages that come through, and sometimes they're a little bit contradictory. I think that's because, quite rightly, the county has encouraged them to put in their own local support, but sometimes that's restricted through budget, sometimes it's restricted through just the number of people they've got. And I'm just wondering if it would be possible to do two things. One is for us to give a little bit more guidance as a county, and support to encourage consistent messaging. And the other one, and this is an old topic, you've got the issue on, does money go to Hampshire or does it go to the districts? It never goes to the right place, and there's never enough. I think if the districts felt that we were supporting them to lobby government more for more funding, there's all the press about the 7 billion shortfall for local government, but where does it go? We need to make sure it's reasonably well distributed to help get those messages out there. Is that something we could maybe do a bit more of? Or are we doing enough? Maybe I'm just not aware of what we're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Forster. Oh, there's Councillor Mellor. Yeah, Councillor Mellor, would you like to come in?
Yes, I'm sorry about that last technical hiccup. I'd just like to ask David, he's covered very well, it's a very good presentation, very well the situation in Hampshire. I think we must be mindful when he's talking about claimants. I think over a third of Hampshire adults work outside their areas of residence. In particular, you're looking at people certainly in North East Hampshire who work in Surrey, work in Berkshire. Most of my population in Tatley works in Berkshire, believe it or not. Are we taking these factors into consideration? It is the residents as much as the employment in Hampshire.
Thank you, Councillor Mellor, and I'll go to David now to sum up and respond.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll just try and answer those specific questions if I could, in order and briefly. I think Councillor Withers makes a very good point about the risks associated with effectively the demand created by consumers, if you can call it that, in Bournemouth on the days he was referring to, but it all being concentrated in one place at one time. I think one of the benefits of the measures changing over the weekend coming is that a lot of that demand will hopefully be more distributed. So actually you're going to have a lot more outlets that are going to be open in different parts of the geography. So actually, I suppose there's no science to this, but what we're certainly hoping is that some of that consumer demand will be more distributed, because the challenge in the times over the last couple of weeks was there was almost that issue of, well, where do people go, because a lot of the visitor attractions and other outlets just weren't open. So and the other thing as well is that the government has established an initiative called We're Good to Go, which is effectively creating an industry standard for the hospitality sector, so that actually they can effectively use that as a kite mark, a quality mark, to say we're complying with all the government's guidelines. So hopefully that might help in terms of individuals having confidence that the premises there, or the facilities they're going into have met the government's requirements. The question about the consistency of messaging, yeah, I think we recognised quite early in the process, particularly around the government grants, that there was a challenge there, because those grants were being distributed through the districts and boroughs, not through the county council. Making sure all the comms around that was reasonably consistent was possibly a challenge. The one thing I would say around funding, and if anybody who's done the maths will note that of that 410 million that was allocated across Hampshire and Isle of Wight, if 350 million has been distributed, that still leaves you with about 60 million that's sat in local authority bank accounts, not doing anything for the economy at the moment. And we have already started lobbying government in terms of not necessarily saying to the government, you know, let all those local authorities retain that money, but making sure there's a way that money can be pooled locally so that it can actually be used to support businesses. Because, as I say, that £60 million worth of funding sat there, which government has effectively accounted for, but which is not productively doing anything locally. So that is something where we're actively, as the county council and other partners, lobbying government. And then the final issue, Councillor Mellor raised this. This is a challenge we have on a lot of our data, Councillor Mellor, is most of our data is based around, if it's around individuals, it's usually around residents. But of course, as you say, because of work patterns, that doesn't always give an accurate picture. When we look at things like productivity and prosperity, prosperity is based around individuals based here, residents. But actually, when we're looking at productivity, we're looking at kind of output per worker, so effectively the people that work in Hampshire. So there are complexities around that, but we can certainly provide an indication of whether it's resident-based or work-based. We can still give an indication of the whether that's around residents or whether it's around employment within businesses in Hampshire. I mean, I can certainly engage with Councillor Mellor separately on that issue if he wants some more clarity on that point.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I just wonder whether, Stuart, you have anything to share with the committee following that discussion on the economy and the recovery.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think it was a really good discussion, and members, you know, have hit a number of the really important points there. If I could just offer one further thought. I mean, we are very active on social media. We do put a lot of stuff out, and I think often when one sits down with the communication team and actually do an analysis of things, you'd be surprised at how much stuff we do put out on social media and also supporting the local media. But I do think Councillor Withers made a really good point about the need to get that, sort of trying to instill confidence back. The other point that I wanted to pick up on really was there's a lot of discussion about differences between different districts, communications and things like that. The High Street support point is a really good one, because some of that funding has come to the county council to deal with highway measures. Some of it's gone to the district, some of it's gone to the LEPs. But the County Council has been extraordinarily active in getting stuff done on that, using the money we have. And we did issue guidance, and I myself have written on at least 2 occasions to all the district chief execs, letting them know what we're doing, asking them to let us know where we can help with some of the measures that they were taking, and setting out the guidance, as the Highway Authority for accommodating, queuing, pubs and restaurants wanting to put tables outside, all of that kind of stuff, which falls between the 2 organisations. So we have worked hard, and I think it's generally been a successful story together. But the scale of this economic impact, I think, is something that we haven't faced before, particularly in the south of England, for a very long time. I'm hopeful that the Bank of England's comments today are going to be right, that it's a V-shaped recession, that we're and hopefully we'll be able to bounce back. And some of the stats seem to indicate that the recovery has already started, which would be really good. But I think it's probably, Chairman, a subject that we're going to come back and talk again and again about at the Select Committee, because I know members are very, very interested in the kind of economic recovery and progress with that.
Thank you, Stuart. That's really helpful. Well, I was just about to move to summing up, but Councillor Thierry has put his hand up. So quickly, I'll come to you, Councillor Thierry.
You're most kind. I want to make the observation that no matter what you try to do to stimulate the economy, it all boils down essentially to the pound in your pocket. And so many of our residents who do not have now the financial resources that they previously had at the start of COVID-19, and they're not in a position, therefore, to go out and to spend as they once were. The same actually applies to businesses, that the reserves that businesses have currently are nothing like those which they were able to draw on before COVID-19. And I do have a concern that we can spend money in areas asking folk to spend money that they actually haven't got.
Yeah, well, it's a good point. Thank you, Councillor Thierry. Members, we've had a really good discussion, and we don't have a vote on this item. It's a presentation that we note and thank David for. We will obviously return to this topic in the forward work programme, and that brings us to item 10, which is the work programme. And I know David and Stuart have suggested that the local enterprise partnerships be invited to update us later in the year. So that sounds like a good suggestion to me. And if any other members have any other items or comments on the work programme, please raise your hand now. I'll just say a couple of other things for noting. Due to the cancellation of the April meeting during the lockdown, some items have been moved to the list at the bottom and they need to be reallocated. So that's something that we'll be seeking to do. It may be that we'll need an extraordinary meeting to be added to the calendar later in the year to accommodate. We'll see how it goes. And the usual April meeting will likely be arranged for March 2021 to allow for the pre-election period commencing at the end of March. So we usually be in April, but next year it will be March. So those were the updates. Councillor Thierry, did you have your hand up to talk about the work programme?
I did indeed, very briefly. 2 words, Highways England. We were looking to invite them to come before this particular panel committee.
Yes, well remembered, good point. Katie, we'll make a note of that, please. Councillor Todd. You're still on mute, Councillor Todd.
Okay, I'm not sure if we handle this as a review of how we've done on social distancing measures and what we've learned from them, or whether we do something to drive ahead walking and cycling. I mean, the walking and cycling is still on there, as they have been for most of my time on this committee, as suggestions to be added when timely. I actually think walking and cycling is quite timely. There was an idea for a conference to discuss that, which we may have difficulty with capacity, but doing conferences and discussions about things like for the whole of Hampshire are actually much easier now than they have been in the past. So I would like to suggest either that we do something informally to tap into the cycling and walking groups around the county, or that we do find a way of putting it on the agenda in the context of what we've learned from our social distancing and other measures to support walking and cycling.
Yeah, okay. Well, fair comments. I mean, I think we've done quite a good job as a committee of scrutinising cycling, and we had the cycling strategy come to us twice over the last 18 months. The team that work on cycling are quite busy at the moment with all the social distancing measures, the active travel. But I think all of the expertise that's being built up within that team is being put to very good use. But I take your point, Councillor Todd, and we'll look to build something into the agenda for a future meeting.
Something in 2021 feels like a kind of when we've had a chance to implement a lot, see what's happened, learn from it.
Okay.
Possibly.
Okay, good point. Anyone else wish to speak? No? Okay. Well, we just about kept it under 2 hours, which I'm pleased about. I'd like to thank officers for participating in this meeting and being so helpful in their responses and very good presentations.
Chairman,
I'd like to thank members.
Chairman,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. It's Jackie from Democratic Services. Can I just do a poll for the recommendation to approve the work programme?
Oh, right. Okay. If you feel, yes, sure. Go ahead.
I just pop that in the chat now.
There it is. I can see it. So whilst everyone's voting, I was just about to thank members for your contributions and for joining the meeting. I'd like to thank Katie for organising the meeting and being so efficient about getting everything done. Thank you, Katie. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Councillor Humby, for attending the meeting and responding to everything. And the next meeting is on the 8th of October, and I think it's safe to say that will be a virtual meeting as well, unless there's some cure found for COVID-19 over the next 2 or 3 months. But I think in all likelihood, we are going to be meeting virtually on the 8th of October. So whilst I said all that, I see that we have got votes in, and am I right in thinking, Jackie, that the vote is carried? We have 9 agree, yes?
Yes, and we have a couple of comments in the chat which agree. So it's a majority are all in favour, so that vote is carried. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. And thank you, Councillor Todd, for that point about the street lighting, which I've noted. And we do have it on the work programme to look at that at some point, and we will. So thank you. Councillor Simpson, yes?
Yeah, could I just confirm that we will go back to a morning meeting, because you appreciate Councillor Curl could not arrive because of work commitments, although he'd put aside morning. So if we could confirm that next time we will do all we can to get a morning rather than an afternoon meeting, please.
Yeah, the 8th of October is a morning meeting. So hopefully Councillor Kerr will be able to attend that. We'll see. Councillor Todd, sorry, I think you wanted to say something else.
Yeah, there's a point which is on the October agenda. There's a point about streetlights and safety, and it's currently framed as just looking at crime reports. And from my perspective, it's actually more about the fear of crime and how that's leading to changed behaviour. So I don't think it's enough just to go. I think we have seen situations where the low lighting has been associated with higher breaking and entering and other such things. But I'm thinking of particular areas where we have lots of young people coming out of nightclubs and things like that, and poor lighting, and what impact it has in terms of their behaviour, their feeling of safety, how they feel about when they're out and about. I think it's important to understand that as well.
Yeah, no, well, absolutely. That's well noted, and we will make sure that the presentation we're given takes account of those possible changes in behaviour. We can't fix the agenda at this stage because we don't know exactly what we'll need to look at. We need to leave some room for things to change. But thank you for all your points, and I will obviously work with Councillor Humby, with Stuart Jarvis and Katie Sherwood to develop the agenda for the October meeting. And that brings us to the close. Thank you everyone for joining, and look forward to seeing you all again at a future meeting.
Yep.